Hey guys, Organized Biology here. We just completed our first week of classes at our community college. And so this is Anatomy 1, the first week overview. Okay, so this will probably be about 15 to 20 minute overview video about what we've learned this first week and how it's going to set us up for the remainder of the course. So I'm going to be going through 5 main things. So here they are. Number 1, we're going to go through the big concepts of human anatomy that'll help you understand the rest of it. The levels of organization from atom to organism, organ systems, so the 11 organ systems, how to remember them, homeostasis, what it is, how we maintain it in 2 different ways, as well as a short, brief section on serous membranes. And as you can see, I have them numbered everywhere on this board, but just come with me through each one. So let's look at number 1 first. These are the 6 big picture ideas of anatomy and physiology. Usually you can trace any sort of functioning of the body, any sort of thing in the body, back to these 6 core concepts. Now let me explain to you what each one is in detail. First off, homeostasis. This is maintaining a stable set of internal conditions of the body. Every system of your body exists to bring it back to the set point because this is a livable range, okay? So these can be things like blood pH, blood glucose levels, blood pressure, temperature. All of these things have a set point in your body. They have to stay within a certain range in order for you to stay alive and not have disease, because the absence of homeostasis for a chronic period of time is called disease. So homeostasis, key. High to low. Things like to, in nature, move from high to low. First off with gravity, but second off with concentration. If you have a high concentration of water, so there's a ton of water in this area, but there's less water over here because there's a lot of like salt and stuff. Well, the water, high amount of water over here, low amount of water over here for concentration wise, it's going to move towards the area with more solute, towards the area with less water. High to low, that's called osmosis when it's happening across the cell membrane. Okay, so high to low, things move from high to low. That's called passive transport, no energy is required. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. Whenever you have an issue in your body, just like whenever you have an issue with your bike, if there is a tire that's squeaking, you're gonna focus your attention on that squeaky wheel. In your body, if you cut your hand open over here, right, your blood clotting factors are not going to go to your foot or your shoulder or your brain, God forbid. They're going to go to the area of issue. Okay, so usually with the human body, if there's some sort of need or metabolic need, energy demand somewhere, it's going to shunt that energy, shunt that blood to that area. Okay, squeaky wheel gets the grease. Location, location, location is the next one. Just like real estate, you need to understand where things are happening in the body. If you can identify, okay, this is in the interstitial fluid right outside the blood capillaries at your kidney. Boom, you have a working understanding of where it's at and also why it will function the way it does based on the location it is in. Just like lymph, so the fluid in your lymphatic system is not lymph until it gets inside your lymphatic vessels, okay? Otherwise, it's just fluid outside your capillaries until it gets in your lymphatic system. So location, location, location. Same thing for neurotransmitters and hormones. I may have mentioned that in class. Hormones are secreted into the blood. Neurotransmitters are between synapses of neurons, okay? Use it or lose it, or move it or lose it. 2 things here, use it or lose it. If you work your muscles out, they're gonna get stronger, energy's gonna go to them, you're gonna build mitochondria in those muscle cells, and they're gonna thrive. But if you don't use them, they're going to atrophy, right? So use it or lose it. Same thing with your brain. The more you think, the more you read, the smarter you will get, because the more you're using your brain, right? Makes sense. Also, move it or lose it. A lot of the times, if something is staying still in the body, so for example, I don't know, say there's some sort of inflammatory protein going on in the blood vessels, right? Causing some issues that you don't want. A lot of the times, if it stays there, there's going to be some sort of protease enzymes that will break that down to get it out of the body. So either it's helpful or it's not helpful, and the body's going to rid itself of things that aren't helpful and hold on to the things that are helpful. So that's a good way to think of it. And then lastly, I should have started with this one. Structure determines function. If you look at something, you can usually tell what it's meant for based upon what it looks like, the shape, the size, the color, the sharpness, the looseness, the surface area. Those types of things will determine the function of that thing. Okay, so like your skin, okay? It's got to cover your whole body. It's very thin, it's very tough. It's also stretchy, just in case you accidentally try to cut yourself or like you run into something. It's not going to cut very easily because it's very tough, right? Structure fits the function. The study of the structure of the human body is called anatomy. The function, physiology. You're taking an anatomy and physiology class, a structure and function class. Those are the 6 big core concepts. I took a while with those because I want you to see how those apply to basically every situation, okay? Number 2, levels of organization. This is something I did not understand in high school, how things connected from the atomic level all the way up to the organismal level. So I kind of stepped those in and I rubbed against atoms. So the base unit of all matter, all stuff, are atoms. Okay, you put atoms together, so like things like carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, those 5 key life atoms, CHON-P. You put those together, make water, oxygen, which is O2, 2 oxygen atoms put together, glucose, C6H12O6. Those are considered molecules. They're atoms bonded together. Sodium chloride, NaCl, is another great example. You put very big molecules together, you get macromolecules. The 4 that we talked about in class were carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. I also gave several prefixes and suffixes that will help clue you in if you see a new word on knowing which macromolecule it is. So just from my memory, carbohydrates, a lot of them start with gly or glyco or glue, as well as ending with os. Another prefix is called sac, S-A-C-C-H, like monosaccharide, disaccharide. Those are all carbohydrates or sugars. Lipids, if it starts with LIP or lipo, usually determines that it's a lipid. If you have fatty acids, makes sense, fats and lipids are the same thing. So if you see anything that says something fatty acid, it's likely a fat, lipid. Also, if it ends in OL, like cholesterol, or if it ends in OID, oid, like steroid, hormones are lipid-based hormones. Proteins, biggest one, very specific. Your body is made of different proteins. The reason you look different from the person next to you is because your proteins are different. Okay, so proteins build your cells build your body, right? Proteins, common prefixes, suffixes. Prefixes would be pro or proteo. That means protein, makes sense. Or pept, like, let me think. Pepsin is an enzyme that deals with proteins. Peptides are amino acid sequences put together. That's a protein. And then if it ends in IN, laminin, melanin, all proteins, keratin. And then the biggest one I took a while talking about are enzymes. Enzymes are proteins, very specific. It's like a lock and key model, right? The enzyme works on a very specific substrate, a very specific thing, right? So it's very specific down to the atom. Like if one atom is out of place, it ain't working, okay? Enzymes are specific. Now, how do we know if it's an enzyme? It will end in ASE, ACE, okay? So lipase, enzyme that breaks down lipids, lipase. If it says synthase, that means that it's going to be putting things together. I like to think of enzymes as molecular scissors, ending in ace, or molecular staplers, ending in synthase. So glycogen synthase, let's break it down. Glyco meaning carbohydrate, ogen, generating, like genesis, the creation. So we're creating glycogen from the enzyme glycogen synthase. Synth means to put together. So we're putting together actually chains of glucose to make glycogen. That's how you store carbohydrates in your body. So just by knowing glycogen, the prefixes and suffixes, and synthase, same thing, you know that it's an enzyme that's building glycogen in your body. So I took a long time on that in class. So those are some macromolecules. The other one I did not mention, prefixes and suffixes, are nucleic acids. That's your DNA, that's your RNA, that's ATP actually. Usually those end in something nucleic acid, although ATP and ADP, cyclic A&P, all these things with like AMP or ADP, it's a nucleic acid just in a different form, but I won't quiz you on that. Organelles, these are the mini organs in your cells that are doing the work, right? So Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, nucleus, your plasma membrane, I would consider that an organelle. All of these things work for the cell so that the cell can exist, survive, and do what it needs to do. Now, depending on the cell, like if it's a neuron, a muscle cell, a brain cell, whatever, it's going to have different amounts of organelles. Okay, it's going to have different amounts of organelles. So, for example, your muscles need a lot of energy. They are chock full of mitochondria, because mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, makes ATP, which ATP can then be hydrolyzed so that your muscles can move. So it's using that energy from the ATP to move. Whereas your skin cells, as they're getting sloughed off, less and less mitochondria, they're super thin, don't have much room for the organelles, so it's not going to be making as much energy. Makes sense. Hey, because structure fits function. So organelles, many organs. Cells, the base unit of life. If something has a cell, it is considered alive. Okay, so we have a bunch of different types of cells I just went through. If you cluster a bunch of similar cells that have a similar function, you get tissues, not Kleenexes. They're called tissues, also called histology, the study of tissues, as well as cells is cytology, the study of cells. Organs, big amount of tissue put together in a very nice way. That's an organ, okay? So your heart, your lungs, your spleen, your brain, all these things are organs. They're built of the same tissue type so that then they have a similar function. Organ system, multiple organs working together, like your cardiovascular system, okay? So you got your heart and your vessels. You've got your urinary system, which consists of your kidneys, your ureters, your urinary bladder, all these things. They have a similar function systemically as a system, so they're called an organ system. Lastly, organism, obviously, full living thing like me, like you, like your dog, like your cat. All things are organisms. That was number 2, levels of organization. All right. Number 3, at any point, pause and just kind of ruminate over this. This is a lot of material. 3 are all of your organ systems. I abbreviated a few of them so they could fit on the board. The way I remember them, and I will ask you to memorize these, is because I had a very bad professor one day in my anatomy class, and every day she'd walk in and she'd be like, tell me all the systems of the human body in 1 minute, go. And I'll never forget her name. Her name was Dr. Mins, and she was very cruel because every day she would force us to memorize the organ systems, right? Cruel Dr. Mins. If you look top to bottom, I wrote down cruel Dr. Mins. That corresponds to the 11 systems of the body. Hope you never forget that. I'm going to go through the functions very, very briefly. I will miss some things because many of them have multiple different functions, but I'll give you the highlights. Cardiovascular, heart and vessels, transports nutrients and oxygen to all of your body's cells so that they can survive. Respiratory system, basically your lungs, and I could argue the blood vessels and heart to kind of work together. Respiratory exchanges oxygen and carbon dioxide gases at the lungs. That's important to regulate blood pH as well as to deliver oxygen throughout the body because you need oxygen to combine with glucose in your mitochondria to make ATP energy, which is what you need for your body. Urinary system expels wastes and excess nutrients that you did not absorb through the digestive system, filters your blood, regulates ion balances, regulates blood pH, does a ton of things, fluid balance, all that. Endocrine and nervous, I'm going to kind of combine. They're both master regulators and communicators to your body, but they're in 2 different ways. Endocrine's through hormone secretion, which is long-term chemical communication, whereas nervous is very quick. So all the muscle movements, all the words I'm speaking are coming from nervous system to skeletal system, making a very quick movement happen or a very quick thing happen. Whereas the endocrine system is usually longer term, but both are regulators. Lymphatic system brings back fluid lost at the capillary beds to the heart. So any fluid that leaked out of your capillaries when they were delivering nutrients to your cells and tissues will get reclaimed, most of it, by your lymphatic system, bring it back around here, and go back to your heart. Okay, so it reclaims the fluid, and it also has a big role in immunity. Adaptive immunity, where you're going to have a lot of white blood cells in these areas, in your lymph nodes specifically, that'll attack pathogens that may have leaked out as well, and basically protects you from other potential viruses and diseases that could come into your body. So two-pronged for the lymphatic system. Digestive system, absorbing nutrients. So you're breaking down big bits of food, big macromolecules, right? Breaking them down into smaller bits so that you can absorb them and use them for energy and for all the other things that you need, okay? So that's your digestive system, and obviously everything else will be expelled out, the stuff that you didn't absorb. Reproductive system, don't really have to talk about that one, right? Make babies. Spermatogenesis, oogenesis, making the sperm, making the eggs, all contributes to the reproductive system. Muscular and skeletal, sometimes they combine those for motion and support. Muscles more the motion, skeletals more support and protection. Integumentary, covering, insulation, heat regulation is a big one for the integumentary, as well as the muscular system, actually. The muscles make a lot of your heat for your body with hydrolyzing ATP. And then I already went through nervous system. Boom, there's the 11, okay? Moving on further to homeostasis, probably the biggest topic that I went through this week was maintaining that stable set of internal conditions. Remember, all of these systems exist to maintain that stable set of internal conditions, okay? Homeostasis, super important. There's two ways we can do this. One is through a negative feedback mechanism. So let me give you an example. Say, let me actually give you a metaphor first. I like to think of negative feedback as a thermostat. Okay, thermostat has a set point. Let's say it's set at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, it gets too hot, 72 now, because the sun's beating down your windows. Okay, that's the stimulus, it's too hot. So what the thermostat does is it receives that information, oh, it's too hot here. And it sends that information to basically its own control center, first its computer, then sends it to the AC unit. AC unit kicks on. AC unit decreases the temperature in that area, therefore homeostasis is returned, the set point is returned. Same thing happens for your human body, for your temperature. When you get too warm, okay, receptors in your body will detect this change, okay, and it will tell the control center, mostly your brain and spinal cord, that you're too warm. Once it does that, it'll tell your sweat glands to secrete sweat, so that then that sweat will evaporate, cool you off, homeostasis is returned, okay? However, you have to turn this off. You don't just want to sweat your whole life long, right? So once negative feedback happens, once that set point is resolved and achieved, this stimulus it'll be back at the set point and there will be no receptor interacting with that stimulus anymore. So basically that response, that effector response will stop, okay? So you'll stop sweating eventually. So that's a great example for negative feedback, bringing it right back to the set point. Positive feedback's different. Positive feedback is different because it amplifies the change that occurred from the stimulus. Okay, so let me give you an example. Blood clotting. You cut your hand open, small blood clotting factors will accumulate there, which will stimulate more and more blood clotting factors to go to that area, which will stimulate even more and more and more until, so it's raising, until the set point is achieved again. Okay, so that's positive feedback. Same thing with oxytocin release when you're giving birth. So again, oxytocin release. So when you release oxytocin during childbirth, what will happen is the uterus will be stimulated to contract. As the uterus contracts, baby's getting pushed out. Baby gets pushed out, stretches on the cervix. The cervix will have receptors that notice that stretching that says, yo, baby's coming out of me right now. We should fix this. So what it does is it tells your brain, hey, we need more oxytocin. Keep pushing that uterus out. So the oxytocin, again, will be increased in the bloodstream, go to the uterus, stimulate contractions, push baby out, stretch cervix, go back to the brain. More oxytocin is released and continues positive feedback until baby's out, cervix relaxes, and then no more oxytocin because that receptor in the cervix will not be stretched anymore like it was, which will tell the brain stem basically, okay, we don't need any more, you're done. Okay, so that's positive feedback mechanism. Last thing we talked about this week, serous membranes. Anytime you hear SER, it usually means fluid, like serum. You may have heard of like blood serum before, or serum in syringes. What serous membranes do is they secrete a lubricating fluid. That's the biggest thing to remember, okay? Now, where does it do this? Location, 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 right? Where does it do this? Around the organs and the other accessory things inside of your cavities, okay? Your holes of your body, right? So your organs are going to sit in these pockets of serous membranes, okay? Think about your heart, okay? Your heart, it's beating. Okay, it's pressing up against your rib cage, it's pressing down against some things, right? And that could cause a bunch of issues. If there was no lubrication there, there'd be a lot of rubbing and rubbing. And you know, if you rub your skin together too much, it turns kind of red and inflamed, right? So if we didn't have serous membranes, you would constantly be having inflammation of your internal organs. But since you have them, well, now we have this nice, soft, lubricated inner lining that the organ can sit within and beat or move however it needs to, and it'll have this lubricating surface that will not induce any inflammation. Now, you need to remember two parts of these serous membranes. The one that is actually touching the organ is called the visceral side. Viscera means organ, makes sense. So this is the organ side of the serous membrane. And then there's also the parietal serous membrane, which is the outside covering, okay? So you'll have the organ touching the visceral side, and then on the outside is the parietal. Now, why do we have an outside of parietal? Well, because the organ's pushing up against other things too, right? So we need lubrication from organ to serous membrane, and we also need lubrication from that spot to the next organ that it's next to, right? So then there's lubrication between organs as well, okay? So that was Crash Course of Week 1. I hope this was helpful, and please drop any questions in the comments, and subscribe, and like, and do all the things that are so kind, and I appreciate so much. Thanks for watching.